The Unsullied were not simply soldiers purchased with gold. They were the result of one of the cruelest systems ever created in the world of Essos, forged through decades of suffering, discipline, and unimaginable sacrifice. In Astapor, young boys were ripped away from their families before they could even understand what freedom meant. From the moment their training began, every piece of their humanity was systematically destroyed. The masters believed fear created weakness, so the boys were beaten, starved, and forced to endure endless punishment until emotion itself became dangerous. The financial cost of creating a single Unsullied was already enormous, but the human cost was far worse. Entire generations were consumed by the slave trade, simply to maintain the reputation of Astapor's legendary army. The training process alone required staggering resources. The masters had to feed thousands of recruits for years, while most of them would never survive long enough to become real soldiers. Weak boys died during training, others were executed for showing compassion, and many simply collapsed from exhaustion before they reached adulthood. Yet the masters accepted these losses because they understood the final product would be worth a fortune to kings, merchants, and warlords across the known world. The Unsullied were treated less like men and more like handcrafted weapons, built slowly through brutal investment and endless cruelty. Each Unsullied was trained in spear combat, so relentlessly that fighting became instinct. They practiced under the burning sun of Slaver's Bay until their bodies moved without hesitation. Unlike ordinary armies, they did not rely on emotional speeches or loyalty to banners. Their obedience was absolute because their minds had been broken long before they ever stepped onto a battlefield. This level of discipline required years of constant supervision by trainers, guards, and slave masters who devoted their lives to maintaining Astapor's military machine. The cost of supporting such an enormous institution would have drained the treasury of many kingdoms in Westeros. Their equipment added another layer of expense. The Unsullied carried identical armor, shields, spears, and helmets designed specifically for disciplined formation warfare. Maintaining thousands of perfectly equipped soldiers demanded huge quantities of bronze, leather, iron, and craftsmanship. Unlike peasant levies in Westeros, these soldiers could not simply arrive with farming tools and crude weapons. Every piece of their gear had to meet strict standards, because the reputation of the Unsullied depended on perfect uniformity. Buyers were paying not only for soldiers, but for the terrifying image of unstoppable order. Astapor's economy itself revolved around the production of Unsullied warriors. Slave markets, training compounds, blacksmiths, merchants, and shipping companies all profited from the trade. Entire districts of a city depended on the constant export of soldiers to wealthy rulers across Essos. This created a dangerous cycle where war became necessary for economic survival. Peace threatened profits, while conflict guaranteed more buyers willing to spend mountains of gold for disciplined troops. The Unsullied were not merely an army. They were the foundation of a massive and deeply corrupt industry. The psychological conditioning of the Unsullied required methods so extreme that even hardened warriors from Westeros would have been horrified. Recruits were forced to kill infants, endure torture without screaming, and survive impossible trials designed to erase fear completely. These practices created soldiers capable of terrifying discipline, but they also ensured that thousands died before graduation. The masters considered those deaths acceptable losses because scarcity increased the market value of surviving Unsullied. Every surviving warrior represented years of investment and countless corpses left behind in the training yards of Astapor. Transportation costs made the Unsullied even more expensive for foreign rulers. Armies could not simply march across oceans, especially elite forces requiring supplies, guards, and strict organization. Wealthy buyers needed fleets of ships capable of moving thousands of soldiers safely across the narrow sea or throughout Essos. Feeding them during long voyages demanded additional supplies and planning. The richer the buyer, the larger the order, which meant the logistical burden became enormous. Only the most powerful rulers in the world could realistically afford to purchase and maintain large numbers of Unsullied. What truly separated the Unsullied from ordinary mercenaries was reliability. Mercenary companies often betrayed employers when offered better contracts, but the Unsullied obeyed commands without question. This reliability dramatically increased their price, because rulers understood loyalty was often more valuable than raw military strength. In a world filled with treachery, assassinations, and betrayal, an army that never broke formation and never questioned orders became one of the most valuable military assets imaginable. The masters of Astapor exploited this reputation relentlessly, driving prices higher with every successful campaign fought by their soldiers. The fear surrounding the Unsullied also carried immense strategic value. Entire cities surrendered after merely hearing rumors that Unsullied forces were approaching. Enemies understood these soldiers would not flee, panic, or abandon their positions under pressure. Their reputation became a weapon more powerful than swords or spears. Rulers who purchased Unsullied armies were paying for psychological dominance as much as battlefield effectiveness. Sometimes wars were won before they even began because opponents knew ordinary soldiers could not easily stand against such terrifying discipline. Despite their incredible effectiveness, the Unsullied represented a fragile system built entirely on slavery and fear. The moment Daenerys Targaryen shattered Astapor's control and offered freedom to the Unsullied, the entire economic foundation of the city collapsed almost instantly. Generations of wealth disappeared in a single day because the masters had invested everything into controlling human lives. Their greed blinded them to the possibility that the very soldiers they created could one day destroy the system that forged them. In the end, the true cost of the Unsullied army was not measured only in gold, but in the destruction of countless lives consumed by one of the cruelest institutions in the history of Essos. The battlefield reputation of the Unsullied was built through relentless discipline that ordinary armies could rarely match. Most soldiers in Westeros fought for land, family, or survival, but the Unsullied fought because obedience had been carved into their minds since childhood. Fear could not easily break them because fear itself had been beaten out of them years earlier. While other armies panicked during cavalry charges or burning sieges, the Unsullied remained locked in formation, like living walls of bronze and steel. Their calm under pressure made them terrifying opponents, even against larger forces. One of the greatest strengths of the Unsullied was their ability to function as a single organism instead of individual fighters. Every movement inside their formations was precise and rehearsed through years of training. Spears moved together, shields locked instantly, and ranks rotated with mechanical efficiency during combat. This level of coordination allowed relatively small groups of Unsullied to hold positions against enemies with far superior numbers. On chaotic battlefields filled with screaming soldiers and collapsing lines, their discipline looked almost supernatural. Unlike knights from Westeros, the Unsullied required no glory, titles, or rewards to motivate them. Noble armies often struggled with arrogance and personal ambition because commanders wanted fame as much as victory. The Unsullied had no such distractions. They existed purely for military purpose, which made them highly efficient during long campaigns. They could march farther, endure harsher conditions, and obey dangerous commands without hesitation. This made them especially valuable to rulers planning difficult invasions or brutal occupations. Their famous resistance to pain increased their battlefield effectiveness even further. The Unsullied were trained to endure suffering that would shatter ordinary men mentally and physically. Wounds that might send other soldiers fleeing often failed to stop them entirely. Enemies frequently described the horrifying experience of fighting warriors who continued advancing despite severe injuries. This reputation spread fear throughout Essos because armies depended heavily on morale, and morale collapsed quickly when facing enemies who seemed incapable of fear or exhaustion. Daenerys Targaryen understood the true value of the Unsullied better than most rulers ever could. When she acquired them in Astapor, she did not simply gain soldiers. She gained the core of a professional army capable of supporting her dream of conquest. While many armies in Westeros relied on temporary banners, called by noble houses, the Unsullied represented a permanent and disciplined military force loyal directly to her. Their presence gave Daenerys legitimacy and power far beyond what her small following previously possessed. The Unsullied also excelled during sieges and urban warfare because their discipline prevented chaos inside narrow streets and crowded cities. Ordinary troops often lost cohesion during brutal close-quarter fighting, But the Unsullied maintained organization even in terrifying environments. Their ability to execute commands instantly made them highly adaptable during assaults on fortified positions. Whether defending gates, advancing through city streets, or holding narrow corridors, they performed with terrifying consistency that frustrated enemy commanders repeatedly. Another reason the Unsullied became so feared was their willingness to die without retreating. Most armies eventually break when casualties become unbearable, but the Unsullied often continued fighting until complete destruction. This forced enemy commanders into extremely costly battles because intimidation alone rarely worked against them. Victories against Unsullied formations demanded massive sacrifices, making many rulers hesitate before engaging them directly. Even experienced generals understood that defeating the Unsullied could leave their own armies crippled afterward. Their emotional detachment also created an unusual advantage during war. Many soldiers hesitated when facing civilians, children, or horrific battlefield conditions. But the Unsullied had been conditioned to obey orders without emotional interference. This made them brutally effective during occupations and military crackdowns. While this lack of emotion horrified many observers, it also increased their value to ruthless rulers seeking absolute control over conquered territories. The Unsullied became symbols of authority enforced through perfect obedience. However, freedom slowly transformed the Unsullied after Daenerys liberated them. For the first time in their lives, many began developing individual identities, friendships, and personal loyalties beyond simple obedience. This change made them more human, but it also introduced emotional complexity they had never experienced before. Some discovered pride, others discovered love, and many struggled to understand what freedom truly meant after lifetimes spent as living weapons. Their transformation became one of the most tragic and fascinating evolutions in the history of Essos. In the end, the Unsullied were both masterpieces of military discipline and horrifying reminders of what slavery could create when pushed to its absolute extreme. Their effectiveness on the battlefield came from years of unimaginable cruelty designed to erase fear, emotion, and individuality completely. Kings and conquerors admired their power, but that power was built upon endless suffering hidden behind polished armor and perfect formations. The Unsullied army became legendary because it represented the terrifying possibility of turning human beings into weapons so disciplined that entire kingdoms trembled at the sight of their advancing spears.